Book of Proverbs, chapter 8, verses 12 through 13 says, I, wisdom, live with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, and evil is oppression or unrighteousness. I hate arrogant pride. Today, we dedicate an entire month to arrogant pride every year. But he says, I hate arrogant pride and the evil way and perverse utterances. And the evil way, that's the ways of evil men. So when this says that the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, fear is not an attitude of abject horror or anything like that. It's not that you have to be cowering and afraid. This is talking about Yahweh, Christ. It has to do with deep reverence, humility, and respect for his authority, wisdom, and power. And this leads to obedience and a desire to please him. Well, how do we do that? We do that by study in order to know him. Study is the highest form of worship. And I've heard the quote, I don't know the origins, that someone is too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. That's not really a true statement because our focus should always be on God and heavenly things. However, we should not ignore what's taking place on earth. And that, I think, is the actual meaning of the quote. It says, don't have blinders on about what's going on around you. Now, God gave us the earth and he told us to be good stewards of it. And it's our responsibility in addition to heavenly things, not instead of heavenly things, but the two things go together. And with that in mind, what we've been looking at and what we're continuing to look at are things of this age that are involved in biblical prophecy. Now, we looked briefly at genetic manipulation, and although we're going to be looking at this more in depth later, I wanted to bring one thing out because I stumbled across an article about this last week, about 5 minutes after we finished our lesson. And this is about woolly mice. They're kind of cute little things. You might find these in Jurassic Park. That's what scientists were pointing out. They were pointing out how cute they are. But these things that have such potential for misuse are always presented in a positive light. And they do have positive intentions, at least at first. Well, what woolly mice are is they're mice that scientists have spliced genes from extinct woolly mammoths onto them, and they came out all woolly with fur like that, which kept the mammoths warm during the last ice age. And they also had fat deposits that kept them insulated. In other words, these mice are just like woolly mammoths in that they have fur and fat deposits in their body. Now, what the plan of these scientists is to resurrect the extinct species by splicing these genes into an Asian elephant, which is their closest living cousins. But the test run was done more quickly in mice because mice gestate in 20 days instead of 20 weeks like an elephant does. Now, this seems like something that's very interesting, but it's also potentially a bad idea. Woolly mammoths may not be the problem as much as the misuse of technology is a problem. I think that this falls into the realm of angel technology and that it can create the same effects as the fallen angels did, no matter how the fallen angels did it at the time. Now, back to where we left off last week. Last week, we started talking about HARP. HARP is a high frequency active auroral research program in Gakona, Alaska. And because this lesson itself is very long, we had to divide it into two parts. So we had a terrible stopping point last week. But we talked about Nikola Tesla's accidental control of a weather event, about the government seasoning his work, and then the government weaponizing the weather. In fact, they've weaponized the entire sky. And because of the military interest in HARP, that we ended up talking about war. Now, if you've not listened to the first part of this study, I would recommend listening to it first. But all of this is applicable to our overall study on the return of the Nephilim. But this is a little sidetrack to get an understanding of technology that duplicates things that the fallen angels and demons did in the pre-flood world. Now, warfare is as old as man. It's older than man. The angels seem to have been at war. And we don't know what was here before man was created, so there was probably war then also, based on what we know. But even using warfare and weather is not new. In The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and every Christian should read this because we're at war whether you read it or not. But in The Art of War, there's a lot to be said about the importance of weather in making strategic assessments of a battlefield. In Vietnam, the United States conducted Operation Popeye, which seeded clouds in order to extend monsoon season over the enemy supply line routes. They called it Make Mud, Not War. Dubai recently used electricity to create rain in the desert, but it got out of hand and they had tremendous flooding in the middle of a desert. We've been modifying the weather for several decades that we know of. Yet the government officials claim that the power of HARP is too low to affect global weather. A lightning bolt contains about 1 billion watts of electricity. A hurricane releases as much energy as 1,000 nuclear bombs. How could HARP compete with that? Well, it's called chaos theory. And you may have heard of the butterfly effect. And I'm not talking about the movie by that name, but the theory that a butterfly's wings can start a small disturbance in one part of the planet, and then a chain reaction creates a hurricane elsewhere. Weather is a chaotic system. That's why the weather forecasts are always so off. I mean, they can predict things as a generality, but they're not very accurate because small changes can trigger larger events. And the designers of HARP, they understand chaos theory. They understood that there is no need to match the power that's produced in nature. They only had to know where to apply the pressure of the butterfly wings. And HARP is the most powerful butterfly wing ever created. If you were to pick the right spot in the ionosphere to push it out into space just a little bit, that energy will discharge back down the radio beam and hit the Earth, and it would be about 100 times the energy that's released in a thunderbolt. In other words, the smaller amount of energy can produce a larger amount of energy than nature can produce. Edward Lorenz, who's a mathematician who became a meteorologist, he presented this idea in 1972. He had the beginning of the idea in 1963 after he had created about a dozen skeletons of weather patterns based upon mathematics. But in 1972, he presented this idea that a butterfly could set off a series of events that would lead to an event far away. History is full of butterfly effects, which is easy to see in retrospect. For example, Hitler wanted to be an artist, but after he was rejected by art school, he chose a little bit of a different path. In World War II, Kokura, Japan was supposed to be hit with an atomic bomb, but there were too many clouds to find a target, so they went to Nagasaki. A wrong turn by a driver led the car of Archduke Franz Ferdinand to get stuck in traffic beside a sandwich shop where the previously failed assassin just happened to be buying a sandwich, so he shot him, which triggered World War I. So the butterfly effect started out explaining weather events, but it had obvious implications outside the realm of weather. So HARP does not need to match the power of nature. It just needs a little nudge at the right place at the right time to trigger a catastrophe. Weather manipulation became such a concern that in 1977, the United Nations banned it through the Environmental Modification Convention. Now, the United States didn't listen to the United Nations, and in most cases, they probably shouldn't either. But in this case, they didn't listen to them. But in 1999, the United Nations specifically addressed HARP and called for a ban on all technologies that could turn the weather into a weapon. Well, this was also ignored, and so the United Nations issued many resolutions calling for transparency, oversight, and monitoring of facilities such as HARP. Now, while I distrust the United Nations with the utmost prejudice, they had a valid concern about what was going on. In 2002, President Vladimir Putin of Russia expressed concern about geophysical weapons that could alter the weather. Then both Russia and China built facilities that could affect the ionosphere, which had obvious military applications, and no one talks about the arms race that is literally taking place above our heads. They talk about the nuclear arms race and the ships and everything like that, but they ignore the weaponization of weather because it's more difficult to see. Well, whenever the ships set sail and you have all these ships go out there, you can see those. You can't really see what's taking place in the ionosphere. There's not much of a photo op, so they don't get a lot of press time because they can't be used to instill fear among people. And the media does want to instill fear among people, so does the government. But it's something about which the people should be concerned. Now, by this point in time, HARP had the ability to create low frequency waves which could penetrate into the earth, into the seas. This means it could now be used to find underground bases, tunnels, and caves. This created new areas for the government to use. This was a new frontier. These waves oscillate precisely within the natural atmospheric resonance. But what would happen if those energy waves were directed at the fault lines deep within the Earth instead of at the atmosphere? When earthquakes are examined, scientists focus on tectonic stress and resonance frequency. Every object vibrates at a natural frequency: the atmosphere, metal, rocks, your brain. If you expose an object to its natural frequency, it amplifies the vibrations, sometimes to the point that they damage the object, much like using sound to shatter glass. I've got a short video here, and they're hitting the glass with a sound that shatters the glass. This is called resonant frequency induced material failure. It works on large objects, as we saw in the 1940 events at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge last week. The wind hit the bridge at its resonant frequency and it tore it apart. Well, the tectonic plates in the Earth also have resonant frequency. Now, tectonic plates are large slabs of the Earth's lithosphere that includes both the crust and the upper mantle. These plates float on the semi-fluid asthenosphere beneath them. They move, but they move very slowly. And that causes earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and formation of mountains. So fault lines are cracks in the Earth's crust which build up enormous tension as they moved against each other, and triggers can release this tension. It builds up so much tension, something triggers it, and we get earthquakes. This morning, I heard that there was a 7.7 earthquake that hit Myanmar and Thailand. Well, in 1983, a scientist named Brooks Agnew used radio tomography with only 30 watts of power looking for oil in the ground. Now, radio tomography is imaging by sections using penetrating waves. It's kind of like a CT scan at the hospital, but on a much larger scale and over a wide area of land. Well, he found 36 oil wells over a 9-state area, and he was accurate 100% of the time. And that was using only 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HAARP uses 2 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere. That sounds kind of risky. On January 2nd of 2020, an earthquake hit Haiti, killing more than 200,000 people. It hit a 7 on the Richter scale. Now, some people got suspicious because the quake happened along a fault system that behaved differently than geologists had predicted. Also, coincidentally is always in quotation marks. It may be coincidental, it may not. But monitoring stations recorded unusual heating patterns and electromagnetic anomalies in the ionosphere over Haiti. In other words, the air heated up about the same time that the earthquake happened. Also, coincidentally, HAARP just happened to be active during this period of time. Hugo Chavez, the communist dictator of Venezuela, accused the United States of causing the earthquake using tectonic weapons. Well, he's a communist, so his claims were automatically dismissed. They may have had some validity, maybe not. However, researchers looked at the technical possibility. And in the course of this research, it was discovered that the same patterns occurred during the earthquake that hit Sichuan, China in 2008, which killed nearly 1 million people. Skip ahead to 2011. The earthquake that caused the Fukushima disaster and caused widespread tsunamis just happened to coincide with ionospheric anomalies that were detected by multiple measuring stations. So these correlations, and remember, we looked at correlation versus causation. Just because they're correlated doesn't mean one caused the other. But these correlations concern China so much that they, along with Italy, launched the China Seismo-Electromagnetic Satellite, CSES, also known as Zhangxing, in 2018 in order to study the connections between the ionospheric disturbances and earthquakes. So Chinese researchers published papers that looked at correlations between heating in the ionosphere and earthquakes and how HAARP's energy had been detected just a few hours earlier. Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 through 8. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. As a child, when I was in church, It was always inferred that these events would be divine. It would be God's hand. It would be miracles causing these things. And the earthquakes would be great and they would level cities and there'd be devastation everywhere. However, swarms of little earthquakes, when you get a whole bunch of small earthquakes together, they tend to precede the major disasters. And now we have a correlation between what men were doing and these disasters happening. Prophecy tends to tell us what is going to happen, not how it's going to be brought about. So these things should concern us, and we need to be aware of them. And this is all disturbing enough. But the most alarming aspect of this technology has nothing to do with the sky, which is where it started, or the ground, which is where it advanced to, but the fact that it can penetrate the one thing that will affect each and every one of us, no matter how much we prepare, and that's the human mind. And by us, that refers to everyone who is present when these events take place. Now, the human brain has a frequency that ranges from about 1 hertz to 40 hertz. There are studies of 40 hertz sensory stimulation that enhances training. It can help you train better, and it may even treat or even cure Alzheimer's. The frequency varies depending on how alert you are, and different parts of the brain operate on different frequencies. So think about your brain as a radio receiver and your spirit as the radio signal. With the two together, you're a living soul. And if something interferes with that signal, then things might not work properly. Rupert Sheldrake did some work on this. He was a scientist. He's a PhD out of, I think, Oxford. And we're going to look at this in the future, but we tend to think of the brain right here in our head where our mind resides. But it appears that the brain is simply the interface between the mind and the body, and the mind is somewhere out there. Now, I don't know where out there is, but it seems that the mind is not actually centered in your brain. Genesis 2:7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the spirit of life, and man became a living soul. Man's a three-part being. We had a physical body, got a God-breathed spirit, and then man became a living soul. So extreme low frequency, ELF, but extreme low frequency sounds can affect your brain. HAARP can generate waves in the same frequency range as that of the human brain. When government officials were asked about this, they pointed out that their antenna array does not generate ELF waves. This is technically a true answer. But when dealing with the government or the military, you have to be aware of doublespeak or military speak, which obfuscates what is being said. In other words, you must ask the right question. You have to be specific. HAARP cannot generate ELF waves, but it can heat the ionosphere in a way that creates ELF waves as a byproduct. And it's been documented that HAARP generated ELF waves for years, which is a problem because this can influence brain function. This is called frequency following response, FFR. HAARP has the ability of affecting the FFR. This is where the brain locks onto an external signal and it begins to mirror it and even affect the brain chemistry in such a way that events are simpler than HAARP can control minds and change the mental function entirely. Now, none of this proves anything, but FFR is proven science. Dr. Michael Persinger, funded by the United States Navy, conducted research that showed that weak electromagnetic fields applied to the temporal lobe of the brain can induce altered states that include religious experiences and hallucinations. Now, there's a reason that the Bible warns us against sorcery or pharmakia, drug use, and other occultic practices, because other occultic practices created the same situation that we're creating with this ELF. When the brain is exposed to an external frequency, the brain tends to synchronize with it, and that's why bright flashing lights can trigger seizures in some people. Now, the European Union takes this seriously enough that they pass a resolution, and if you want to look it up, that resolution is A45 1999. But this resolution specifically mentions HAARP. I find it interesting that it mentions HAARP, but it doesn't mention the Russian or Chinese facilities, just the American facilities. But this resolution mentions HAARP and expresses concern about not only weather control, but about people control. They took this seriously. Things that affect human health, both mental and physical. The psychological aspects itself are nearly impossible to contemplate. Just think about being able to be controlled externally and have no control. But their resolution called for transparency about HAARP's ethical implications. Does the United States military listen to the European Union? Of course not. For better or worse, they don't. And I'm not sure that they should. Not sure that they shouldn't. But because HAARP uses the ionosphere, it can influence people over large areas, including realistic hallucinations, change of emotions, physical illness, and seizures. Um, and when I say realistic hallucinations, like you actually believe them. Someone recently sent me a clip from Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is a TV personality and an author who has a doctorate in clinical psychology. I've seen a handful of clips that people have sent me over the years, and he seems to be legitimate. But in this clip, there was a young lady who accused her father of molesting her. However, the evidence, and this was as close to proof as you can get. You can't prove a negative. It's logically impossible to prove a negative. But all the evidence so strongly implicates that he didn't do it. But equally strong was her memory of it. And this is called false memory syndrome. Her brain remembers the event. She's not making it up. These memories are hardwired into her brains, but they never happened. And apparently, this young lady was aware that the memories may be false, so she did accept the conclusion. She didn't argue about it. She had some idea that these were false, but she remembers them completely. False memories can be caused by others, either intentionally or not. The controversial recovered memory therapy uses things such as hypnosis and drugs to recover memories, and recover is in quotation marks there because in reality, it may be creating memories. Traumatic events can also cause them, such as a jolt of electricity, which we're talking about, or a traumatic brain injury, and theoretically things such as ELF. Some examples of false memory syndrome are recalling a trip that never happened, recalling being lost in the mall when it never happened, or misremembering details of a crime when influenced by leading questions, remembering turning off an appliance or locking the door, confusing the source of information, such as a dream that you think is real or news stories that never happened. These are all real things. Some hallucinations can be so strong that they seem real. Revelation chapter 13, verses 13 through 15. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had the power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Are these things true miracles? Or are they technology? Doesn't matter. Either one is possible. But the deceiver is here to deceive and to lure the world, particularly the visible church. But he wants to lure the world away from the one true God. He might blink his eyes, he might twitch his nose, he might snap his fingers, or he might use technology, angel technology. So don't look only for a miracle when something ordinary will do the trick. Now, officials deny all this about HAARP. However, keep in mind that the CIA denied that they were researching mind control for decades also. But then their Project MK Ultra was exposed for the world to see. We know that it happened. And they claim that they're no longer doing it, but all indications are that they're continuing the research. Well, the CIA was researching the same technology just on a different scale. There's a paper called The Mind Has No Firewall. There's a link to it in the discussion below that was published by the U.S. Army War College. And actually, they republished it. It was originally in a Russian military journal in 1998. They translated it into English and then published that. But this paper warns that the human mind is vulnerable to electromagnetic intrusion. Proverbs 4:23, keep thy heart And your heart is your inner self. It's your understanding. It's your mind. But keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Mind control technology is not the stuff of science fiction or conspiracy theories. Well, it is a stuff of it, but there's a basis for it. It's a science fact, and it's been studied and it's been weaponized. In the 1980s, it was pure conspiracy theory, but as with so many other conspiracy theories, it turned out to be true. We have proof of it. They admitted it. As the technology of the United States advances, the rest of the world is trying to catch up. And everything that we've talked about so far has been based on Nikola Tesla's work. Now, much of the technology is what we call off label. It's research, but the results have huge and dangerous applications. The patents tell us the purpose of HARP, including weather modification and earth penetrating applications. And before his death, the developer of the patents told the world of their potential military applications. The extreme claims, such as being able to trigger earthquakes or hurricanes, has no proof of causation, but has many very strong correlations. But as we looked at last week, correlation does not equal causation. We've always had strong earthquakes and storms. The Good Friday earthquake in 1964 in Alaska is one of the four most powerful earthquakes in recorded history. There is evidence that some of the biblical earthquakes may have been linked to orbital resonance between Earth and Mars and may have been far more powerful, but we couldn't measure that back then. But that's only speculation. It's based on some evidence that we have. But through history, it's one of the four most powerful. And although the power of HARP has been increased to 3.6 billion watts, that is still too low to directly cause major weather events. But as we saw, weather is a chaotic system, so small targeted inputs could have major effects due to multiplied influence. Electromagnetic influence is known to influence brain behavior, and we know that the frequencies of HARP overlap human brain waves. But we don't know if they're powerful enough to affect large groups of people at a distance. In 2015, control of HARP was handed over to the University of Alaska, which is still under contract to DARPA, and it now allows public tours and allows independent researchers. However, former DARPA employees have come forward and warned that the most sensitive equipment was removed prior to the handover, and what remains is only a fraction of HARP's capabilities. We also know from other whistleblowers that have come forward that when we find out about scientific advancement, particularly from the government, the science is already at least 15 years old. GPS was developed in the 1960s, but the public became aware of it in general in the 1980s. There was actually primitive AI as early as 1956. There's a movie, Enemy of the State, that came out in 1998. And one of the complaints from critics about it at the time was that it was unbelievable because that technology did not exist. First of all, a movie doesn't have to be realistic in order to be appreciated or enjoyed. Second of all, the technology in that movie was at least 15 years old at the time. It was just not known that it was old at the time. So is HARP an innocent research project? Is it a doomsday device? Maybe it's both. It is technology, it's a tool, and the tool is in the hand of those who use it. With a hammer, you can drive in a nail or you can bash someone's head. Any scientific research will be seen by the military for its military potential, and the dark powers behind the human government will see it as a tool for domination and control. What should concern us the most, perhaps, is not what is known, but what is unknown. And just like the medical trial documents of certain pharmaceutical companies that are favored by the government are hidden, documentation about HARP remains heavily redacted or completely withheld. And where are Tesla's original documents? They disappeared. When the government lies or gives answers that obfuscate the actual answer, that simply fuels speculation and makes people distrust them even more than they already do. And it's important to remember that some trust the government without question as well. Just they look at them uncritically. Oh, they're from the government. They're here to help me. Well, that's both a true statement for some people and a cynical statement for others. Some of this is known fact, and some of it's speculation based upon known fact. And like I said, I'm not presenting this as any sort of fortune telling type of prophecy. I'm only making things known that are possibilities for fulfillment of biblical prophecy. The biblical records would have, or the biblical prophets would have passed along what they saw. God could have said, write these words, then heart blasteth its amber rays into the sky. And of course he could do that, he's God, but it would have been gibberish to anybody at the time. The prophets took what they saw and they presented it in language that their contemporaries would have understood and that we can understand in the same way. How would they describe something that would affect the entire planet with power that was incomprehensible to them at the time? It's almost incomprehensible to me. Technology that could manipulate the entire planet? How do you convey that? Technology that is not thoroughly understood, and we use it anyway. Where do we get that technology? Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, we're going back a few lessons on this to bring this all together. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair. And they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The language in this passage implies that they had consent of the daughters of men. I've heard many sermons preach that they raped the women, but the Hebrew language says otherwise. They had to consent. Why would they consent to that? Most marriages were marriages that were mutually beneficial. You can marry me, but you will give my family so and so. That may apply to technology. Through the Bible and biblically approved extra biblical works such as First Enoch, we know the Watchers, the fallen angels, gave man weapons, cosmetics, medicine, magic, forbidden knowledge, and other things that have been both used and misused. Bring us back to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 out of the Geneva Bible. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in high places. The majority of people blindly accept what the government says. The Bible tells us the truth that even the worldly governors that are backed by the princes of darkness of this world are the enemy. Society tends to think the government's looking out for us, but history proves that to be a lie. Operation Northwoods, MK Ultra, Project Mockingbird, and others. The war protesters tend to blame the soldiers for wars, but that's a misplaced anger. Soldiers, unless they've been dishonorable, should always be honored because they don't start the wars. And when our government is caught, they reassure us that they're no longer doing these things until we find out that they are. Secrecy rarely is a positive thing. Sometimes secrecy is necessary, but not usually, but it's very rarely positive. The government took technology that Nikola Tesla wanted to use to help free mankind, and they hid it away, they misused it, and they have kept mankind oppressed. We don't even know what their budgets are. We don't know who operates these programs, and we don't know what their true purposes are. So why is all of this important in our study of the Nephilim? Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, this is taken from the NET. Now when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like a violent wind blowing came from heaven and filled the entire house where they were sitting. And tongues spreading out like a fire appeared to them and came to rest on each one of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them. If you had never seen harnessed electricity, which most of us have today, but if you'd never seen it, how would you describe it? And notice the above passage says that the tongues were spreading out like a fire, not that they were fire. Tesla coils will generate wireless electricity over distances. One of the biggest dangers of electricity is fire. And recently there was a fire at Heathrow Airport. You know what started it? Electricity. Interestingly, what caused the problem, they were trying to use green energy. They were trying to meet government mandates to use politically correct energy, and they replaced a diesel generator, and they specifically called it a net zero compliant alternative biomass fuel generator. Fancy way to say they did government mandates. And the headline in the paper simply read that the electricity went out. That's what shut down Heathrow. But it later came out somebody leaked that it was a fire. So they caused this themselves, and they tried to cover it up, and the truth came out. But see the way that the fire is used here, the electricity is as fire. We know from modern events that a good jolt of electricity, whether lightning or man made sources, can make some people change accents. It can cause them to have religious experiences, and it can even change their language to one they've never spoken. Unknown tongues. These are not made up tongues, but these are tongues that are unknown to them. Their language in their brain has been changed to something else. What's another event in which language was changed? Genesis chapter 11, verses 4 through 9. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. Therefore the name of it is called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now the Bible does not state this explicitly, but if tongues, as if they were fire, can be used by God in one place to change languages, it can be used in another. And it can be used by the false gods to achieve the same purpose. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. In verse 27, and I saw the color of amber, or I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about. And then chapter 8, verse 2. Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his loins even downward fire, and from his loins even upward, as the appearance of brightness as the color of amber. In Hebrew, the word for electricity is hashmal, which is the same word as amber. In the Septuagint, amber is the Greek word electron, from which we get the English word electricity. And there's a connection here showing the connection between fire and electricity. This image should be in your head. The two are linked together. In the book of Revelation, although it's not spoken of directly, there is enough information given that there will be implemented not only a one world religion, but also a one world government and a one world currency. To achieve that, a common language would be necessary. Today, English is the most widely spoken language when you combine first and second languages together. But that's still only 17% of the world population. Communication is necessary. So, could this fallen angel technology make this possible? Perhaps. No matter what, this technology will give power to the coming beast. It may already be giving power to the return of Baal and influencing people. Why is there such a mania about promoting everyone into the LGBTQ plus movement suddenly? 20 years ago, this group was about 0.5% of the population, and today it's about 10%, and when broken down by generations, it is far greater than that in the younger generations. This is groupthink, but not by intent. This is being put into their minds. Now, if you read secular works, you may be familiar with George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Both of these writers are usually presented as atheists, but neither one was an atheist. I don't know if they were Christians, but they were not atheists. uh, Orwell, who enjoyed reading the works of Hilary Belloc, who was a strong Christian, saw the necessity of Christianity in a civilized world. To him, the decay of Christianity opened the world to a loss of separation between good and evil, and the disappearance of Christianity left a big hole. This is why in the book 1984 there was a denial of the existence of the soul, which pictured hopelessness. Huxley, on the other hand, is presented as atheist because he was descended from some of the most prominent atheists in history. In the beginning, he did scoff at religion because of the influence of his grandfather, but that changed when he was in his 30s. He didn't get it right, but he was on the right path. And as a side note, this is why it's important to teach the truth. If you teach something that's unbelievable, then it's not going to be believed. We have to preach and teach the truth and then let God work on people. Now, the book Brave New World, like 1984, presents excuse me, a dystopian world in which individuality is suppressed and happiness is manufactured. And it seems almost as if we're there now. Bread, circuses. Everybody has to be different, just like everybody else. Oh, don't worry, you're doom scrolling on YouTube. We'll tell you how to be happy. Most of what they present as happiness and what they convince people are happiness is just pure hedonism. It's all shallow, it's all superficial. We see both of these types of visions presented in the Bible to an extent. When someone once asked me if I thought that we were living in an Orwellian world or a Huxleyan world, I had to say yes. We have the endless shallow entertainment and the anything goes hedonism of Huxley, but we have the big brother surveillance state for those who don't fall under the spell of the deceiver. And some, and perhaps most people, want to be controlled. They're automatons, simply trudging from one entertainment to another. What can I do to entertain myself next? Oh, I'm bored. Let's go to the next entertainment. The rest of the people can see the truth, and no one likes the truth. And so that handful of people has to be silenced. And for both of these visions, religion, specifically Christianity and Judaism, has to be erased. The language in the Bible opens itself to the beast image being a system and not an individual. In fact, it implies it. At least it's not simply an individual. An individual may control it, but it's more than just an individual. With technology, it's possible for an individual also to be a system. Neuralink, which was designed to help people with brain injuries, allows people to be hooked directly to computers. What happens when someone who is power hungry hooks into the worldwide AI computer system? Their power is just multiplied exponentially. The end time events that we read of, they may be the results of miracles and what we see coming on now with the return of the Nephilim. But they may also be the result of technology. We need to be aware of both in order that we will be aware when it happens, when we see these things happening. We need to teach others. And the miracles and technology may be connected. Even with God, science and religion are connected. God may take us out of here before things get bad, but that doesn't mean that we're going to miss the entire thing. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 3, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Well, in the beginning implies time. Before things were created, there was no time. Then God created. This is energy. He created the heavens and the earth. This is mass or matter. And then God said, "Let there be light." Remember, God is light, and so he put his light into what he created. And there was light. God is light. Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. This teaches that light is energy. Genesis chapter 1 teaches the same thing. The demons, the Nephilim, and the fallen angels can only take that which belongs to others. They don't create. They're out to destroy. They are the enemies of man more than they're the enemies of God. They're darkness. Don't block out the light. Proverbs 1:7 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Don't be a fool. Take the information that you've been given both in the Bible and in nature that expresses the unseen things of God. Prepare yourself, prepare others. Don't despise wisdom and instruction. You have to be prepared for what is coming and you have to help others prepare. It's our responsibility